Rabbi Jeremy Borovitz, it is great to be here with you. You are the head of Hillel Deutschland. You know more about your position first, so if you can first introduce yourself, give us an idea of what you're doing, because it's really important, and what your background is. We'd love to hear.
For sure. So first I should say my wife, Rabbi Rebecca Blady, is actually the executive director of Hillel Deutschland, and I have the schluss of working for her. And I am the director of Jewish Life and Learning for Hillel Deutschland. Hillel Deutschland is an organization. We're connected with Hillel International, but unlike being based in a campus, we are sort of city and country based. So we work with young Jewish adults across Germany, actually, ranging from the ages about 18 to 35.
Wow, that's amazing. First of all, I must say, you're American, and that's your background. So do you need to speak German to be able to do that? Is that, I'm assuming that's part of the description or not?
When we began our work, we first came here about 7 years ago, and we came for a month. And at the time we were called Base Berlin. We were affiliated with sort of the base movement. And we came for a month, and we honestly...
What's the base movement, if I may ask?
Great, please. So there is a movement that used to be housed under Hillel, but is currently housed in Moshe House of base rabbis, which was like the home of a rabbinic couple, where they would host things out of their home. It was sort of a cross between Moshe House and Chabad, I would say. So we first came sort of connected to base. There was a base in Manhattan for many years, run by Avram Lotek and Yael. We first came as Base Berlin, and we came for a month, and we honestly didn't think anything would come of it. My wife and I feel both are very connected to Europe. All four of her grandparents are Shoah survivors. And for me, I spent a lot of time in both Poland, and I spent almost 4 years in Ukraine. So I felt very tied to Jewish Europe. I've spent the majority of my working life, since I finished university, I've spent the majority of my working life in Europe, in Jewish Europe mostly. So this was something we were passionate about, but we came to Berlin for a month and didn't know what would happen. And we threw a party when we first got there, and 30 people showed up, and we didn't know who any people were. And so one thing led to another. Here we are 7 years later. We moved here full time about 4 years ago. So to your question about German, we began in English. When we started, we did English. Berlin is an international city, and most people speak English. As we've expanded beyond Berlin, German has become more important. And in fact, last weekend, I was in Düsseldorf, which is a city in northwestern Germany. And it was for my first time, I sort of rabbied the Shabbaton in German. And that was a very exciting moment for me. But I also speak Russian, and most of the Jews here have their roots in the former Soviet Union. So that's come in handy as well.
Wow. So how do you do that? How do you pick up German so quickly? Duolingo, I guess, or something like that?
I haven't done Duolingo. I mean, at this point, it's a lot of osmosis. I also thank God, I've always had sort of a talent with languages. And so we have like a tutor who we meet with in the theory once a week, in practice twice a month, maybe. And we've been here 4 years, and our children go to a Hebrew-German daycare, Kippah, Gan. So our kids speak German. So that has certainly sped it up, I would say.
Wow. So since the name of the show is The Jewish World, can we take a step back and just tell us in general, give us a picture of Jewish life in Germany? How many Jews are living in Germany? What are the big communities? And are, I guess, what institutions are in place?
Yeah, so much. I'll try to do it all in in the time allotted. The first thing I'll say is the number of Jews in Germany is tough to say. The first thing you should know about Jews in Germany, and this might be discomfiting for some of your listeners, which is there are official numbers of Jews in Germany based on people who register as Jews.
Yikes. By the way, any registration of numbers of Jews in Germany scares the life out of me, and I probably shouldn't have even asked that because...
but by the way, it exists. There is an official sort of Gemeinde system, an official community system. So the way most religious life is funded is actually you are taxed. So there is an additional tax that you pay on your tax bill. Based on your tax bill, you pay a percentage above that. And the government then transfers that directly to the religious community of your choice. If you are registered, you can also choose not to register.
So meaning people who register as religious get to, why would anyone register as religious if it means higher taxes? I'm just
first off, you're thinking like an American,
yeah.
Which I should say. No, it's important to people. This is how the Jewish life is funded. Or this is a huge part of the funding of Jewish life, I should say.
And it can't be done directly. It has to go through the government.
This is it is not done directly, I should say. That being said, with the emergence of Chabad in recent years and other organizations that are not official sort of community structure organizations, this is obviously changing and a culture of philanthropy is growing. But I should say, so officially, I think there's about 110,000 Jews in Germany.
Registered.
My guess is registered. My guess is unofficially, it's probably closer to 250,000 based on who you're depending on who you're counting.
Wow.
I would say if you're talking about people with the right to make the current right of return, although TBD, I would say probably 250,000, maybe.
Wow. Oh, it's interesting because I gave a talk about Jews in Spain, and there they have a similar system where I don't know if you have to register as a religion, but you can choose on your tax forms which religion you want to give to, and the number of people who want to give to the Jewish community is much larger than the number of actual Jews. So whether those people do it out of the goodness of their heart or they're descendants of converso Jews, whatever it may be, but you have sometimes the opposite situation where there are less people registered and more people giving.
Yeah, here it's a little more complicated because in order to enter a Jewish community, you need to be Jewish, and the community needs to first accept you. And so another thing that's important there is there's no religious community in Germany that accepts patrilineal descent in Germany.
Really?
Even the liberal Judaism in Germany is quite powerful, but they do not accept patrilineal descent.
And that the same is true for Christians or Muslims?
No, this is just the Jewish community.
Oh, I mean Jewish. Got it.
In the Jewish community, there's no, but I mean, in the United States, the Reform movement accepts patrilineal descent, already has for 40 years. This is not the case with the liberal movement in Germany. And therefore, if you are, as they call them, Vaterjuden here, or Father Jews, you are not able to officially enter communal life. And I should say there's all these communities all over the country. I think there's about in maybe 40 different locales, Jewish communities in Germany. And then there's an overarching umbrella organization known as the Zentralrat, or the Central Council of Jews in Germany.
These things really scare me. It's just that the names are terrible.
And so the names sound terrible because of our association with it.
Yeah, I mean the history, whether the idea of having Jews registered in one place, the idea of a Jewish, similar echoes to the Judenrat, and I guess it's the same language, right? You can't change the whole language over because of the history. But look, Jewish life is gaining a new steam and is really emerging in Germany. It's, if you told someone 70 years ago that Moscow and Berlin would be in all of Europe, some of the largest Jewish communities, they would tell you that's absolutely insane.
Yeah, and I will say, like, Jewish life in Berlin is thriving. I will also say, like, there are obviously small communities in certain places that are mostly older people, that are perhaps not as thriving, but Jewish life in Berlin and much of the big cities is thriving. There are maybe 5 or 6 Jewish daycares. There's 4 Jewish primary schools in Berlin. Wow. There is probably 15 different minyanim on a Shabbat morning.
Wow.
Of various denominations, ranging from Orthodox to liberal to sort of German conservative, which sort of resembles 1950s conservative Judaism, I would say.
Right. How does that work? Because America is very, very denominational. It's very much part of American culture that, everyone has their different creed, and there's, 1,000 different kinds of Christianity. And that affected Jewish life, as opposed to places like South Africa, where you basically have one denomination, to Israel, where it's one denomination that's sort of recognized by the government. How does this all play out in Germany?
So don't forget, Germany is the birthplace of liberal Judaism. So liberal Judaism has always been strong here. I would say in the post-war era, it was very much sort of bifurcated between there was Orthodox and there was liberal. I would say you've started to have, there is a Masorti presence now, as sort of conservative is traditionally called in Germany today, but it's relatively new. I mean, 25 years, which is pretty new in the landscape. But there was always sort of a liberal Jewish presence. And there was even in the post-war period in West Berlin, for example, there was an Orthodox synagogue, a liberal synagogue, and then a synagogue that was sort of in between.
Wow.
So there always was this element. It's not quite like the US, and also, it's different. But there you always had sort of these differences that existed. I would also say in other places outside Berlin, it's different, but I would say in the bigger communities, you will have often the main synagogue will be an Orthodox synagogue, but you'll also have a liberal community that also meets there.
Wow. And Germany is not only the birthplace of liberal Judaism, but in a way, it's also the birthplace of Ashkenaz Jewry. Yiddish spread from Germany outward. And I guess I'm wondering if a lot of the minhagim, the customs that German Jews were very meticulous about, were preserved. So, for example, you have the wimple, there's various German Jewish customs. Yotzrot, a lot of the piyutim are composed there. Akdamos. Is there any, uniqueness given to the customs that have that were central to German Jewry before the Holocaust and before liberal Judaism? The whatever marked Ashkenaz Jewry.
So I will say, unfortunately, there aren't a lot of places that are sort of preserving the Yekishe tradition. There is a Yekishe minyan in Berlin that is doing a very good job of preserving it. But it's an exception, I would say, rather than the rule. Ashken normativity or Sepharda normativity, whatever it is, it has been influenced by the rest of the Jewish world, I would say, in that way. But you have certain communities sort of where the Yekishe tradition still goes strong. A part of the issue is in the post-war period, a lot of the Jews who repopulated German cities were not German Jews. It was Polish Jews, it was Romanian Jews, it was Hungarian Jews who were moving to Germany in the post-war period. I think the number is there were about 30,000 Jews in Germany in the early 1950s. I think that's the number that I've heard sort of thrown around. So and most of those, I believe, were not sort of German Jews.
The German Jews had sort of like the privilege, quote unquote, of having advance notice. So many of them immigrated to America. You don't have almost a situation of German Jews who survived all the camps, etc. Most of those who survived because they left pretty early. With the exception of the insane story of Rabbi Yechiel Yaakov Weinberg, who survived in a camp because they forgot him there. So I guess, a lot, Jews who are in Germany are for the most part not German Jews. I had the honor of living in Washington Heights near Yeshiva University, and there you have, of course, Kal Adas Yeshurun, with the whole Frankfurt Gemeinde and preserving those customs.
Yeah, and you'll also, excitingly, in Berlin, you have both Adas Yeshurun, Adas Yisrael and Kahal Adas Yisrael, both of which have their own claims on sort of being the inheritors of the Hildesheimer, and the Sridei Ashes, like sort of legacy, et cetera, in different ways. Although that's a complicated story. I'm not gonna get into.
Yeah, I mean, we always have our internal kerfuffles. How are the Israelis coming to Germany affecting the community? How are they being received? What kind of numbers? Because I know in Israel there's always press about the number of Israelis that are moving to Berlin. How is that playing out?
So for the most part, they are not really integrated into Jewish life. And this is actually one of the interesting things, that Berlin, for sure, has the most Jews of any city in Germany. But it's no longer the largest community. Munich is technically a larger community in terms of registered members. Israelis are a big part of that. Most of the Israelis do not enter official communal life.
Wow.
They sort of have parallel structures that they exist. First off, a lot of them are connected to Chabad here. There's also certain Israeli religious communities that have there's another sort of Taimani community that exists that has reached out to a lot of the Taimani Jews. There are Israelis certainly who go to synagogue, but many of them are not officially members of the Jüdische Gemeinde zu Berlin, the Jewish community of Berlin. There is an incredible I'll just note there's an incredible group called Zusammen, which is run by Dati Leumi couple from Israel, who have basically built a whole they have finally organized the Israeli community, probably more than people tried for many, many years. In the last 5 years, they've really been able to do that. So there's now, I would say, a hub of Israeli life in Berlin, but it's very much Israeli life rather than, I would say, Jewish life.
Wow. I mean, that's very similar to what we see in America, where Israelis are often reluctant to join the established Jewish community, and they'll go to Chabad, they'll have their own thing, or just disaffiliate, which is very sad. But what is driving this growth in the Munich Jewish community? Because that, to me, is very big news. I did not know that.
So first off, I would say it's actually more shrinking of the Berlin Jewish community than growth of the Munich Jewish community, which is a conversation for another time about why people are leaving the Berlin Jewish community. But the Munich Jewish community, I would say, is very strong. The woman who runs it, Charlotte Knobloch, has been running the community for many, many years. And she has been very, very successful at creating sort of strong Jewish life in Munich. And so Munich is a very, very large Jewish community with a strong Jewish life and presence.
I'm a very big day school fan. I teach in a day school. My grandfather was one of the builders of the American day school movement. Are there day schools in Germany?
Yeah, so in Berlin there are 4. And then there's a day school in Munich, in Frankfurt, and in Dusseldorf.
And these are K through 8, K through 12?
They're all now K through 12, I believe. Yes. In Berlin, it's a little more complicated because there are in Berlin, there are 4 primary schools, and then which basically goes through 4th grade. And then there are 3 schools that go to universities. So there's one less after sort of the initial year, and of those 3, only 2. There's 3 that go all the way to 12. K through 12 as we might think of it. And then in Frankfurt and Dusseldorf and Munich, it's all through graduation. And I want to say it's possible I'm missing another one, like somewhere else. And I would say there's probably 15 cities that have Jewish kitas or daycares. So basically through kindergarten, because school starts at 1st grade here. So there are Jewish kindergartens in probably 15 cities.
Wow. And then in terms of post-high school, if I understand correctly, there is in Berlin a louder yeshiva. Is that true? Or
so the yeshiva is no longer active, really. They have a rabbinical seminary there now.
Orthodox, conservative, reform.
Yeah, so there's 3 rabbinical schools in Berlin, actually. There's the louder one, which is Orthodox, sort of a little Gatesheady, London Beit Din facing, if that makes sense. And then there's a liberal rabbinical school called the Abraham Geiger College, and then a Masorti rabbinical school, the Frankel College, both of which are associated closely with each other and also with the University of Potsdam.
Wow. That's mind-boggling. And look, it's impossible to ignore the elephant in the room. There's so much history, but Germany was also the initiator and the engine of the Holocaust. There were collaborators across Europe, of course, but how does that weigh in on Jewish life, both in terms of connecting to the life that was there beforehand, and just dealing with Germans who sometimes some feel guilt, some feel less guilt, and just unpacking all that tragedy and history and guilt and what have you not.
Yeah, it's a ton. It's super heavy. I would say there's such a heaviness to Jewish life here. I'll also say it's part of the power of the work, which is like Dafka to be building Jewish life here, feels very powerful. There is so much trauma floating around so much of Jewish life here. And there's so much fear. Like so much of Jewish life is supposed to only take place behind the walls of the synagogue.
That's for practical security concerns, no? Or meaning, let me just backtrack a second.
Yeah.
If I walk like this with a yarmulke, in what percent of Germany can I walk like this with no concerns?
So it's a good question. I walk around with a yarmulke. I definitely have more. Other than one specific incident, which was particularly violent, I wouldn't say most of the incidences were violent. Most of the incidences are uncomfortable.
Really? So people say things to you?
Yeah. First off, the majority of the comments, I would put them in the category of philo-Semitic, which is also uncomfortable.
It's like a bit what we call here being bageled, people saying shalom or stuff like that.
Yeah, but it's weirder because it's like people coming up to you in a coffee shop and being like, I just have to tell you about my father who was a Nazi. And I'm just like, I'm sending an email.
Wow.
So people apologizing to me, and I have to be like, I can't accept your apology. I'm sorry.
No.
Like I can't do it. The people who can forgive you are dead.
I was on the train here. I don't know if you know the Metro North, so it goes in from Connecticut, wherever it is, and goes into Harlem towards Grand Central. So there's this couple of German tourists sitting near me, and they're talking in German, and like they look at me, and finally they turn to me and they say, "You understand what we're saying, right?" And I said, "A lot of it, because I speak Yiddish." So we start talking, and she looks around. She says, "A lot of the buildings here in New York are very old." And I said, "Well, that's because we were not bombed in 1945 and brought down to rubble when we lost the Second World War." And so there's that. I'm sure that's something I'm sure everyone almost has a grandfather, great grandfather that have a lot of history.
Well, I will say there's an incredible movie called Mazel Tov Cocktail, which I highly recommend. It's about 30 minutes long, that talks about basically what it's like to grow up Jewish in Germany today. It's an incredible film. It's made by a young German Jew of a Russian-speaking origin. And in the film, it gives an incredible stat, which is something like 73% of Germans think their grandparents were a part of the resistance. When in reality it was less than 2%.
Wow. Was there a resistance? Because
for sure there was a resistance, and you should give credit where credit is due. I mean, I know
I've never heard of German righteous among the nations. Even Schindler, from Schindler's List, the best we have on him is that he decided to keep the slave labor that he had, keeping him rich rather than have them killed. But I've never heard of.
So again, first off, part of the reason that there aren't as many German righteous among the nations is, as you said before, there weren't German Jews hiding in the same way. But there was an incredible German resistance. There was the Rosengasse. There was a famous.
Yes.
Yeah. So that's a famous story. You also had there were dozens, if not many dozens, of Jews hid in the Jewish cemetery.
Oh, what was her name? Rosa. There was then the Jewish woman who collaborated with the Nazis and turned in all the Jews that were hiding. You know what I'm talking about?
I don't know what you're talking about now.
I'll tell you the story in a second. But look, there were.
I will say there was a German resistance, so I don't want to say there was not a German resistance, because it is important to see. We should take the history as it fully is. And there was a German resistance, and we even there's a woman in our community who her grandfather was put in a concentration camp as a German for his resistance to the war. And after the war, his grandfather, all of his children converted to Judaism.
Wow.
Because they were like, this was where they felt the affinity, like they didn't have a shared background anymore with so many of the other people.
Wow. So just the name of this woman, she was called fascinating and tragic story. Her name was Stella Kubler. And she basically was caught by the SS, and she worked in it's estimated that she turned in between 600 to 3,000 Jews who were hiding in Germany. But yeah, look, there's a lot of I guess, or actually, I don't know how many Jews did survive inside Germany.
So this is a question I don't have an answer to, I would say, other than to say most of the Jews who survived in Germany got out beforehand. And again, like you said, they had warning, they had money. It was a very sort of different scenario, certainly, than the people living in Western or Eastern Galicia, who were the victims of the Einsatzgruppe, and
right.
these mass killing fields, Babi Yar, et cetera, et cetera.
But just to get a picture, because what you're saying is very much news to me. If I walk with a yarmulke in most of Germany, I'll be fine. I'll make it home at night.
I think 95% of the time you'll make it home at night, which is a high percentage, but it's not 100.
In Europe, yeah, that's meaning it's better than France.
It's funny. In Berlin, there are not a lot of people walking around with kippot. There simply aren't, and so you feel the eyes. I walk down the street and I feel the eyes of people looking at me. Okay. Wow. When meanwhile in Vienna, you can walk around with a kippah and it's totally normative because there's all these other people walking around with a kippah. So a part of it is the normativity, like there definitely is anti-Semitism here. I definitely get more anti-Semitism here than I do walking around in New York, for example. And I don't know that it's necessarily a danger. And that being said, when I'm with my daughters, sometimes I wear a hat because I've been yelled at when I've been with them, and they don't need
really.
That.
And
yeah, they don't.
People are just yelling at you that you're Jewish.
Yeah, different things. Different things. Sometimes it's more subtle, and sometimes it's more in your face. It's not. I would not say it's ubiquitous. It comes in all shapes, forms, and sizes. We live in a neighborhood that is heavily Turkish and also Syrian, Palestinian, Lebanese. And people often say this is a no-go zone for Jews. You can't walk around with a kippah there. And I'm saying, in my experience, it's about the same walking around here as other places in Germany. It's just I get different kinds of comments,
Wow.
Fewer Heil Hitlers and more like Frei Palestina, but it's I haven't seen in my personal experience, I'm much more nervous walking into certain areas of sort of deep East Berlin, which are more supportive of the AfD, the far right party, the alternative for Deutschland.
Really? So there you'll have more people calling out and stuff like that.
Yeah, and I also it makes me more nervous. I will also say the only time I've been a victim of violent anti-Semitism, it was from someone associated with the far right.
Really?
Yeah. And so that is, for me, that does feel like a concern, and the far right is here. I don't want to dismiss it as a concern. It is serious. But it's anti-Semitism's there, and I would never be the first one to say that Germany is perfectly safe. No, I think, to be honest, on a tactless level, you're probably safer in the U.S. From targeted anti-Semitism.
Wow.
From gun violence in general.
Yes, you have that.
Less safe in the U.S.
Wow, it's a tough question because look, Jews who left Spain also decided, for example, the name Toledano, supposedly. You ever hear the Sephardic last name Toledano?
Sure.
So that supposedly is Toledano, we'll never go back to Spain. And then you had German. There was a movement after the Holocaust to make a rabbinic decree to never return to Germany, and yet you see life coming back. It's a hard, definitely for someone who's I spoke once to someone who's a survivor, and he said the Jews who leave Israel and go to Berlin just don't know what it is to be Jewish, which is understandable based on what he'd been through. Actually, a Hillel rabbi, I don't want to, whatever, if you know, you know, but yeah, he's someone who really has felt that. I guess I'm wondering, just in terms of the basics of Jewish life, kosher food, do you ever have a shortage or?
During Corona, certainly there was like, lots of stuff, but no, generally like there's multiple kosher restaurants in Berlin. I think the kosher Jews are always complaining there should be more.
Mhm.
Again,
Is
Berlin
there a
is different.
shechita law? Is there a law against shechita there?
There's no. I'm a little confused on this because there's no law really against shechita, but there's also no shechita in Germany.
Really?
Yeah, so all the meat is imported from other places in Europe, but again, Europe
Oh,
is not so big.
right. It's like New
So
Jersey, Pennsylvania or something. A lot of places.
yeah, well, a little farther than that, but it's like meat comes from Italy, meat comes from Belgium. There's a big shechita industry in Poland, so a lot of meat still comes from Poland.
Hmm.
My guess is that it hasn't happened because of economics, not because of anything legal.
Right.
Uh, because you do need like a certain economics to make shechita work.
Hmm.
Yeah. There
But
is
it,
one rabbi who I won't name who like does private shechita.
wow.
um,
All right.
um,
You got to do
he's
what
a
you got to do.
character. Yeah.
But what about pizza shops, bakeries, that type of kosher infrastructure?
Well, so there are some. A new kosher cafe just opened, which is very exciting for people. It's a smaller community, so it's still like it's not New York.
Right.
It's not.
I mean, even Boston has a limited amount of
Yeah,
I think what they
exactly.
have maybe one kosher restaurant, and it's a city with a large Jewish community.
Yeah, so there's probably, in my guess, I'm gonna totally make up that there's 40,000 Jews in Berlin based on
Hmm.
just totally guessing.
Wow.
And there's like, there's a Fleischik restaurant, there's a restaurant in the Chabad, there's a
Hmm.
kosher cafe next to the store. There's a few vegan places that are under hashgacha
Hmm.
of different rabbis
Hmm.
in the city. Um, and there's a vegan burger place, a hummus place, et cetera, et
Wow.
cetera.
Now,
So there are options, I would say, for
uh,
people.
now you're not only just Germany, but Germany has been taking in thousands and thousands of Ukrainian refugees. How's the war in Ukraine and the extraordinary influx of refugees, which we don't see here in the same numbers or nearly the same numbers, how's that impacting you and your work?
For sure. Thank you for asking that. When the war started, it affected people in our community deeply. First off, I mean, most of the people in our community have roots in the former Soviet Union. Many of them from Ukraine. So it wasn't just like, oh, there's a war happening that's right next to us. There's a war happening that's right next to us, and I got to get my aunt out of her apartment
Wow.
in Severodonetsk. So
Yeah.
it's like, how do I do that? So it was very personal. I lived in Ukraine for 4 years, and I had a large network there. And so the first few weeks were really crazy of like organizing evacuations, like things that I never imagined when I was studying Isser Veheter would like one day be a part of my job portfolio.
Wow.
And then what we actually did at one point is we turned our Hillel space into a refugee center. And
Wow.
we had 9 students living there for about 2 months, which was really, really crazy. And we actually 7 of them were Nigerian nationals who were studying medicine and engineering in Kyiv,
Mm-hmm.
who basically just ended up on our doorstep because they were picked up at the train station by this American Jew from New Jersey.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was like it really consumed our work for a period of time. And to this day, we have a new segment of our community and of Jewish life in Germany who are Ukrainian refugees. I think officially 2,000 Ukrainian Jews have registered in Germany
Wow.
with different Jewish communities. And there's probably more who aren't registered, who didn't have.
Mm-hmm.
If you didn't bring your documents with you, by the way, you couldn't register. Um,
Really?
yeah, so like there are people,
Wow.
there are Jews who fled from Kherson, who it's like if they
Yeah.
don't have the documents, then they can't officially register. In Germany,
Wow.
without the paperwork, there's not much
It's
is going to
tough.
happen.
It reminds
Yeah.
me of the Jew who moves to the Midwest and decides that he doesn't want to be associated with the Jewish people. He's going to pretend he's not Jewish. So he goes to the country club. He tells everyone, he changes his last name, everything, and they sit around the table, and people casually ask, "What religion do you belong to?" So they go to the first guy. He says, "I'm a Southern Baptist." The second one, "I'm Catholic." The third, "I'm Protestant." They get to him, and he's really trying to blend in. They say, "So what religion are you?" He says, "I'm a goy." And so I think in definitely with the history of Germany, that's I think how I would register because it's an unsettling thing considering that history, but I'm sure there are benefits to being registered with the community, and so
And
what
I
do
also
these
say
Jews do?
For the Ukrainian refugees, there were huge financial benefits.
Hmm.
And I will say, like, one of the interesting things is it seems, I mean, the statistics are still being done here, but it
Hmm.
seems like more Ukrainian Jews actually went to Europe than went to Israel,
Wow,
which is, I think, and a big part of that is in Germany, you got a lot of help. You got a
really?
lot of help from the government.
Wow,
You could get housing, you could get language classes. If you could register with the Jewish community, you got
you're
even
in.
more help.
And is it like I'm just curious, is it like the process with the rabbinate where you like how do you prove you're Jewish?
Yeah, so it's with different documentation and things like that. Each community sort of has their own rules and
Hmm.
standards,
Wow.
but it's somehow proving
Hmm. And
matrilineality, not necessarily the 4 or 5 generations that the Rabbanut might require,
mhm.
but usually at least 1 or 2 generations back.
So you bring a ketubah or
No, not
certificate of.
ketubas. You bring the passports, the Soviet passports, where it
Oh, and the
said,
Soviet passport said Jewish.
yeah,
Wow,
exactly.
unbelievable.
Yeah. So
Uh,
usually if you have your mother's passport and it says
mhm.
Jewish, they'll usually take that.
Wow.
And you can show also birth certificates, et cetera, et cetera. I will say the first time I ever had to prove my Jewishness in my life was when our daughter started going to the Chabad kindergarten here.
Hmm.
Um, and they wanted us to prove our Jewishness. And so we sent them our ketubah.
Wow.
And they're like, who is Rabbi Jeff Fox, who is our Masada
Wow.
Kiddushin? Um,
So your
and
last name was not enough. Your
my last
last
name was
name.
not enough. It's like, yeah, I was like, you can call my mom. Like, I don't know what to
Wow.
tell you. But in the end, the way they did it is, two of our Adim at our wedding were Chabad rabbis. Our two
My
Adim
God.
were Chabad rabbis. So one of the Chabad rabbis called that one of our Adim,
Wow.
and he's like, yeah, they're Jewish. But again, this is based on no documents. This is,
Hmm.
you and I don't function in a world of Jewishness based on documents.
Hmm.
But in Europe, it's a huge part of Jewish life.
Wow. And now to the I guess the heart and soul of what it is to be Jewish, the study of Torah. I know it's hard sometimes with the language. Are there resources in German for studying Torah? I don't know if Art Scroll has the German version out, but I'm sure there's an old German. Actually, I'll tell you someone who I'm extremely privileged to know. Um, is Rabbi Breuer's daughter, Rebbetzin Beckhofer. She's still alive. She was born in Frankfurt in the 30s. She's an incredible person to speak to. She lives in Washington Heights. And she really carries the weight. She's Rav Hirsch's great granddaughter, so she has a lot of that, and so she helped translate a lot of the Rav Hirsch Chumashim to German. But then you have also a lot of the German from 80 years ago is now old German. So I guess what do you guys have in terms of teaching Torah, using the language, etc.?
So first off, I should say there is an incredible amount of Torah learning happening in Berlin and across, especially in Berlin, but also across Germany. In addition to the 3 rabbinical schools, we have a kollel that meets every Monday, where people learn over
Hmm.
the course of a semester a parak of Talmud. You have like pop-up batei midrash here and there.
Wow.
You have like a lot of Torah learning happening, and I will say Sefaria, after English and Hebrew, the number 1 language on Sefaria is German. There's an
Number
incredible,
one use, meaning
the
the
number 1 available, and I think
wow,
used after English and
wow.
Hebrew. Although there's more users out of France, as far as I understand,
Hmm.
but there is now a full German translation of Tanakh, of the Mishnah, and of
Wow,
the Talmud
that's
on
amazing.
Sefaria. And there's an
Hmm.
incredible Rabbi Mendel Itkin, who, along with a friend of his, Chaim Guski.
It's funny you mentioned that. My wife is from Hamilton, Canada, and near Toronto, and I think it was Rabbi Itkin's father who was their Chabad rabbi there. So
I don't think it's related.
All right.
This Rabbi Itkin is first generation Baal Tshuva immigrant from Ukraine.
Okay.
Yeah, but anyway, he's a young rabbi, maybe in his early 30s, who's just made it his mission to get all these German translations, which were all done 100 years ago, whose
Right.
copyrights have expired, to get them online so that people can use them. So he has found crazy stuff. He's found things there aren't even yet English translations of, but the German one exists. And so that's also really cool.
Wow, unbelievable. And just I guess some short stories. There's the Rabbi Joseph Carlebach School, right? In is that in Frankfurt? The Joseph Carlebach School, where, do you know what I'm referring to?
I don't know what you're referring to.
Okay, so
it might exist. I'll also say one of the other amazing things about Jewish life in Germany is that it's incredibly rich. And while I would say I have a handle on what's going on in Berlin, there's so much in other parts of Germany that I don't even begin to know about, which I think is amazing.
All right, so there's a school called the Joseph Carlebach School, and here I'll tell you exactly where it is. Well, he was a rabbi, I believe, in Frankfurt, right?
He was in Frankfurt. He was also in Leipzig for a period of time, and also in Hamburg, I want to say. I mean, there were Carlebach rabbis all over the country.
Right. So yes. So there's a Jewish hospital. To just give you a, I'm preaching here to someone who knows better than me, but there was a Jewish hospital built by Heinrich Heine's uncle. And it's called the Israelische Krankhaus. Do you know what I'm talking about? That
the one in Berlin? There is one in Berlin. There might be also one in other places, but I'm aware of the one in Berlin.
All right. Anyhow, so this was built by Heinrich Heine's uncle. I'll just give you a quick story. And he was asked to speak. It's in Hamburg. So here it is. So there's this hospital in Hamburg, and it's called the Israelische Krankhaus, and it's built by Heinrich Heine's uncle. And at the inauguration, the rich uncle asks his promising nephew, the poet Heinrich Heine, to read a poem in honor of the establishment of a Jewish hospital. And Heine gets up there and embarrasses his uncle terribly. He reads this poem where he speaks about how he hopes there's no need for a Jewish hospital, and there are all kinds of sicknesses that can be treated, but being Jewish is not one of them. Really an auto-anti-Semitic statement. So it's interesting. So when they were going to celebrate 100 years for the hospital, the hospital was established in 1843. So they were gonna. The Jewish community in Hamburg was getting ready to celebrate 100 years, but they realized in 1941, and they were still there. In 1941, they realized that they're not going to make it to celebrate 100 years, and they get up there, and Joseph Carlebach gets up and reads a rebuttal to Heinrich Heine's poem from 100 years ago, and he says look how proud we are to be Jewish, that all we do is good for others, and then in that city in Hamburg, they reestablished later the Joseph Carlebach School in Hamburg. Wow. That's one. The other story is my family was from Hamburg, and they moved to Shanghai for business, to China. And but there were not many, and this leads me to a question to you. There were not many dating options in Shanghai for a young Jewish boy in 1910 or so. And so, or this is even earlier. Anyhow, they send a letter to the family they have in Hamburg, and they say, we have a son, we want him to get married. Through correspondence, they arrange the marriage. My great-great-grandfather goes from Shanghai to Seattle on a train across the United States to New York on a ship to Hamburg, has the wedding on first sight, basically, arrives at the family where he's going to marry this woman, and just has the wedding. And then she goes the other way and says goodbye to her family. She knows she's never going to see them again, and travels all that route back to Shanghai, where, again, she doesn't see her family again. My question, social life in Germany, young people often are moving out of communities in rural America, in the Midwest, etc., for places like Los Angeles, New York, etc. Are young people staying in Germany? Are they finding marriage options?
I would say yes, and um, I think what you have been seeing is there's definitely people who are looking for sort of, if you want to be Haredi, Berlin is not a great place to be. Like you just don't have, like, you have some infrastructure, but you don't have the same level of infrastructure as you have maybe in places in Switzerland, in Vienna, and things like that. So if you're looking to sort of live in like an Orthodox, in a strictly Orthodox community, this is maybe not, Germany is maybe not the best place for you to remain. That's not to say there is Orthodox Jewish life here, but it's in the prism of, there's no Borough Park, there's no there's no place.
There's
where
no Gateshead or Stamford Hill.
Exactly. But you can go to the UK, to Israel, to Vienna, and don't forget, all of Europe is available for anyone with a European passport.
Right.
As long as you can find work. A lot of young people are saying, some leave, some want to go to the US, some want to go to Israel, and you also have a lot of people coming here.
Right.
I would say so once a month, I get some email from a friend of my mom's or my aunt's or something like that of like, oh, this guy I know, this woman I know, she just moved to Berlin and she's looking for Jewish community, et cetera, et cetera. So there's definitely sort of a come and go. But even today, we were talking, I was like, there are like 3 couples who are all searching for wedding venues right now.
Wow.
Who we know. And they're like, they're all in conversation with one another. And so I connected like 2 of them to a third one, so they could have a big WhatsApp group to talk about venues and catering, et cetera, et cetera.
Pretty amazing.
So it's happening. Baruch Hashem, people are getting married, families are being built. And it's pretty incredible.
Finally, what do you wish people out there knew about Jewish life in Germany? What's the big secret we all need to know? What is it that more people need to be aware of in terms of Jewish life in Germany?
I would say that it's complicated, and complication isn't a vice. Sometimes complication can enrich our Jewish lives. It's not easy being a Jew in Germany. But I always feel like a Jew. And actually, that is good for me.
Wow. That's a pretty powerful statement. I mean, on a more cynical note, the Germans historically made the Jews feel like Jews through, even when we didn't want to, even when Jews didn't want to. But look, there's definitely a change for good. And it's not easy to get past the past, but it's like you're saying, there, you have hundreds of thousands of Jews who are building lives in Germany. You have new weddings being celebrated, and generations being built. It's almost like the letter of Elie Wiesel. He wrote a letter to God in the 1990s. You know what I'm referring to? In the New York Times, where he writes, look, the children were born and new lives were started, and it doesn't mean the Holocaust didn't happen, but it does mean that there's a new generation there that needs to be acknowledged and catered to. And I thank you for the work you're doing, you and your wife are doing, in terms of whether it's from Ukrainian refugees to people on campus, to just people living their lives in Berlin. So we're thankful to you for that.
Well, thank you. And thank you for the opportunity to talk a little bit about our work. I really appreciate it.
All
and
right.
I'm a fan of the podcast.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. All right. Terrific. Thank you so much.
Take care.